And we have reached the end of an historic Supreme Court term. The final opinions were released within the last hour. The Biden administration has been granted the ability to shut down the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, which was put in place under the Trump administration that made asylum seekers at the border wait in Mexico as their cases were considered. But the other Supreme Court decision limits the EPA on climate change policy and potentially could limit other federal agencies. This, of course, ends the term. It also brings a major change. Justice Stephen Breyer retiring today. That means Ketanji Brown Jackson will be sworn in as a justice, making her the first black woman on the court. Our team is covering all of it this hour. Ken Delanian is in Washington as we await Judge Jackson's swearing in. But let's begin with NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley and the ruling on Remain in Mexico. Julia, take us through the court's ruling. This is a victory for the Biden administration.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kate, because there have been so many blows to the Biden administration and to the Democratic Party's agenda, even going back last week to the overturning of Roe. This is actually a victory. And I have to really spell out, it's not just a victory because they can do away with the Remain in Mexico policy, but it's a victory because of the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the lower courts in this case. They would have been saying that lower courts and the Biden administration or any administration in general had to detain all migrants that came into the United States. That's what the states were arguing in this case. The Trump administration, even as radical as they went on immigration, never said that every immigrant that came to the United States had to be detained before their hearing. So now the Supreme Court is ruling that, in fact, immigrants do not always have to be detained and that the Biden administration did follow the correct policies in ending and the correct procedures in ending the Remain in Mexico policy. By and large, Remain in Mexico really isn't even used that much anymore. The Biden administration is doing it very minimally in 4 locations, and the Trump administration even suspended it during COVID-19 because they didn't want to bring more of those immigrants into the United States for their court hearings. To go back to what this was in the beginning, this just meant that any asylum seeker had to wait in Mexico for their asylum hearing. They were given a court date, and while they waited, they were often in terrible conditions. But it actually was a step beyond what we're seeing now under Title 42, which started during the pandemic and forces migrants to wait even without a court date.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a second, but I'm wondering, you just said it's really only being done, this Remain in Mexico policy, in 4 places. So with the court's decision today, what does that mean at the border?
So that means now the Biden administration will be able to suspend Remain in Mexico. Those 4 places, it will shut down. And they were doing it in some of the busiest locations where migrants could be pushed back into Mexico and then come to a central U.S. city, say El Paso, San Diego, somewhere where they could see a court very quickly. That will now be shut down. But the Biden administration will continue Title 42 because of a lower court ruling. So that will stay in place. So many migrants, about 40%, are still being sent back into Mexico or sent back to their home countries because they're not allowed to come in and claim asylum under those public health rules. Remain in Mexico will be ended now because of this.
Okay, and give us a little refresher on Title 42, because that is still being fought out in court, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the Biden administration sought to end Title 42. Those were those COVID-19 public health policies that said the CDC has granted that any immigrant who tries to enter the United States during this pandemic cannot have the right to come in and claim asylum, because doing so would endanger migrants who were all going to be held in congregate care facilities or come in contact with border agents. The Biden administration tried to lift that on May 23rd, saying it was time to lift coming out of the pandemic, but a lower court ruled it needed to stay in place because the Biden administration violated the Administrative Procedures Act. Now the Biden administration has appealed that. So if in fact it does come up to the Supreme Court, this ruling may indicate that the Supreme Court, this current bench, would side with the Biden administration, saying, in fact, they can lift this. We should also look at what it means for future administrations. Perhaps if this is a court who does look favorably on the executive branch's ability to put in place broad sweeping immigration policies and not just leave that up to Congress, and that they may say then, say a more conservative president comes, someone with policies like Trump, perhaps they could then rule in favor of those policies as well, because you'll see this court now perhaps siding with the president, any president, on immigration policies.
Julia Ainsley, great to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.